I'm just waiting for the stream to catch up.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. You're not going to believe what's happened, but we just started the stream offline and I didn't actually hit go live in YouTube. I feel like such a plum. So let me start again. I'm so sorry, Donna.
That's okay.
Let me do the quick spiel again. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Sure.
My name's Adam Cook. This is PowerShell Southampton. This is Donna Ryan here with us today. Excellent people are now coming up in the chat saying, here we go. So this is good. We're actually making a real start now.
Awesome.
Indicate the length. So it's going to be about an hour, give or take. If you need to drop off, that's okay. You will be able to catch the recording afterwards. It should be available for you tomorrow morning on the YouTube channel. The chat, there is a chat functionality. Some of you are using it already, but in case you're not familiar, please use it. It's on the right. It's live. Engage with us, ask questions. We will be very engaging. We will respond with any questions you have. Donna's okay with me, because you don't have an opportunity to come out on microphone. Donna's okay with me just interrupting her with any questions you have. So please, as and when they come up, ask them and we'll engage. And there's a quality setting in YouTube video, in case you're not already familiar. If you hover over the video and you click the settings cog and go to quality, and you'll be able to choose 1080p, and I recommend it because when we get to things like screen sharing, looking at code, that will help you tremendously. And if you experience any buffering, perhaps your bandwidth may be an issue and you may need to drop the quality, but YouTube might do that automatically. And then one last thing, Donna, before we hand over for the second time, I just want to say thank you to the PowerShell community, because without the community, I wouldn't be able to do the streaming the way I am now. So to everyone in the PowerShell community, thank you very much. And here we go, the second time, please.
All right. So, hi, folks. I'm Donna Ryan, and the topic of today's presentation is going to be building a basic GUI with PowerShell. It's a topic that's a little near and dear to my heart, as I've written a little community tool that's GUI driven. So just a little bit about me here. Professionally, I'm principal consulting engineer with CDW. It's a little company. Actually, it's not. It's ginormous. But I'm out in the field, mostly doing systems management work. I've been with them since 9 years. 9 years this month, actually. I earned my Enterprise Mobility MVP this year. So, yay, that was kind of cool. I'm a blogger and a contributor at msendpointmgr.com. If you're familiar with, the driver automation tool, or, the OSD front end, some of the Intune tools that have been coming out, that's mostly where my contributions end up. I've got Wimwich lives over there as well. I am the lone developer of Wimwich. So for those that aren't systems management folks that are here just for the PowerShell, Wimwich is a community tool that I started writing last year, which has caught on in popularity and is being used all over the world. I'm pretty proud of that one as well. But the big takeaway of this whole presentation isn't so much of how to build the GUI. It's you can learn how to do this too, and you can get good at it. To put this all into perspective, I've been using PowerShell for years, and I need a simple function to do just this. I think the longest script I had written up until July of last year was about 40 lines. And in all honesty, I didn't know what a function was, what try-catch was, how to build an array. I didn't know much of anything. I just knew that I wanted to build this tool. So if I can do it, you guys can do it. And that's really what I'm, hopefully the takeaway that you guys can leave with here is some motivation or some confidence that, if a dingbat like me can pull it off and make a successful community tool, you can do it as well. And, also as a shout out to the community as well. I relied heavily on the community and the bloggers for things like how to use get-item all the way to how to build the GUI and everything in between. Pretty much everything I wrote in Wimwich, which is now about 7,000 lines of code. I more or less had to Google at some point to figure out actually how it worked. So again, you guys can do this. So some of the software that we're going to be using to make our GUI, we're going to need an ISE. And while I've used VS Code, I still use PowerShell ISE because I'm a creature of habit. I've gotten used to its quirks and its crashes, and I know I should move over to VS Code. It's clearly superior, but it's forced a habit. We're going to be using Visual Studio. I like using Community Edition because it's free. For the amount that we'll be using Visual Studio to make GUIs, we're barely scratching the surface of its functionality. But for what we need to do, it's a fantastic free tool. And then the last component that we're going to need is a parsing script. And we'll kind of delve into what that does a little bit. Just trust me on that. I have a URL here that you can use to grab the one that I did. If you want to screenshot this or take a picture of it, cool. I'll have another link to the master blog where this came from. But we'll use that to actually convert the XAML code into something PowerShell will accept and will allow us to interact with. And just for a moment of credit, there's a guy in the community, Stephen Owen, I think he now works for Microsoft, has a blog called foxdeploy.com. He has an absolutely brilliant series called Learning GUI Tool Making. And that's what I learned from. I only made it through about part 3.5 out of 5 because I had to start dorking with the code and making it into, running Star Trek jokes. There's a lot of Star Trek jokes hidden in Wimwich, so it's kind of one of my things. But if you want to afterwards get more in depth, want to know some more of the whys and the hows, or if you like following around and written, I highly recommend you follow his series. It is fantastic. It is probably the best, if not one of the best out there in how to do what I'm doing. I can't say enough good things. And if you want to, if you're on Twitter, which you should be on Twitter, go ahead and give Stephen a follow. Great dude, and his series is fantastic. So let's talk about this method that we're doing. There's a traditional method, which is the forms method, which you go through in PowerShell and you type out every object. So you want to draw your form, you have to declare your form and how big it is, and you have to declare all these things and know the coordinates. Yeah, that's hard. The XAML method is easy, and that's why I'm using it. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into Visual Studio and we're going to draw our window. And we're going to put our buttons and whatever we want into in there. And then once that's done, we're happy with it, we're going to copy the code out and we're going to paste it in the parsing function. And at that point, we can start actually working with it in PowerShell. It's pretty easy. The objects that I'm going to start with are some of those basic UI elements, checkboxes, because that's going to give us Boolean options. If users check this, then you can do this option. If this box isn't checked, then do that. Buttons, the way users can initiate actions. Text boxes for users to input data. Under those, some of these have unique properties that we're going to use. Checkboxes is checked, which tells us if the checkbox is checked or not. The button has an add click, which tells the UI that the button has been pressed and then to do something. And then with text box, the docs text property actually contains the text. I'll show you where all of that stuff lives. But there's also a common property we're going to use called .isEnabled, and that allows us to make objects interactable. So if you're familiar with the idea of having like a something grayed out in a UI, that's .isEnabled, and I use that extensively in Wimwich, and I'll show you how that works as well. So awesome. Enough of PowerPoint for right now. It's enough slide decks. So let's go ahead and where do we want to start? Let's go ahead and start with there's Stephen's blog here, Fox Deploy. You can find the script into right here if you want to go ahead and grab that. It's where it exists. Let's go ahead and start out with Visual Studio because that's going to be our first step. So when you're starting to work with this, you're going through and making a new, and I'm going to add a new item. This wizard can be confusing because there's so many options, but the trick here is you want to select WPF, and this also applies when you're building a new project from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name down here. As you can see, I've zoomed in and I've misspelled world, but that's fine. And we're WPF. And so what Visual Studio is going to do is give us a blank canvas. Now, the way that this thing works, and this is actually pretty cool, is this is what our user is going to see and interact with. This lower pane actually generates the code. Now, you can also mess around with the UI directly from the code. So let's say I wanted to shrink that window down a bit. I could go ahead, and that's what I did here, is I just went down into the XAML, and I modified the width property. And it runs live. The benefit to this is if you start getting in really in-depth, sometimes the UI gets really fiddly with grids and where tables get lined out. So sometimes it's just easier to go down into the code. But the takeaway here is you can mess with either. There's a little toolbox over on the side where we can have common objects. So, as an example here, you got buttons, checkboxes, combo boxes. There's stuff in here I've never even used. I don't know what a grid splitter is. I probably should. I don't know what an expander is. But for the sake of, we're going to go ahead and just start with some basic objects. So we're going to take a button. Oh, and let's take a checkbox. There's a happy little checkbox. And where is text box? Text box and text block. The difference between those two, just for those that are curious, text box is interactable, where you can actually type something. A text block just gives you essentially a blob of text that you can use to label things. It took me a little while to figure out that distinction. So I'm going to take a text box. And we can see that once we dumped these in here, the code has started to populate. And it knows what these things are, because there's a button, a checkbox, and a text box. And we also see that there's various other properties that are in here. There's height and alignment and all that kind of fun stuff. But if we want to make these interactable within PowerShell, we need to do a couple of other things here. One, we need to give them a name. No, you don't. If you want to plunk an object down in here, like a text block, and you're not going to use it as part of the equation, you don't have to name it. But for things that you're going to interact with or pull values out of or make it as a part of the process, you need to name it. And so how does that work? Great question. Let's start with our text box. On the right-hand side, you'll want to pull up the solution or the properties. And if we look down here, it'll default to the Solution Explorer tab. Don't bother with that. Properties is where the money is. And these properties that exist all through here, the is enabled, the text, the visibility, those are all properties you can call from PowerShell. And what's neat is once you've named this and PowerShell registers it as an object, you can modify those properties from your code, which is how the magic happens. So what we're going to do here, in order to make this usable, we need to give this thing a name. So I would call this. Now, why I was running into this last night. Why won't you let me rename you? All right, boy, the demo gods are not smiling on me today, are they? They are not. Let's see. Can I do that? Will that change it? Boy, that's embarrassing. I don't know why I can't modify it. Okay, well, tell you what, moving on, because we are doing live demos, I already have something else pulled up where I made the modification, so we can move forward. Now, where did my property windows go? Oh boy, that's just slightly embarrassing, isn't it?
Sorry. What if you just tried closing and reopening it?
Yeah, I'll try that. Let's see. Let's see if that'll take. Don't save any of that at all. Let's try that one more time. If not, I can adapt, persevere, and overcome.
The old-fashioned American way.
Yeah, that's how you get through live demos, because inevitably something's going to go south. All right, so we click on checkbox. If I do view, can I do property window? Okay, there's properties.
Oh, nice.
All right, there it goes. Now, can I change this name? Hot damn. Okay, I can.
That's weird.
So, all right, yeah, must have been some sticky setting or something. So anyway, let's pretend that we had that old window and we went ahead. Well, actually, I can just show you how this works. Let's go throw another button on there. Their button has no name. We can go here and we call it button 2. Don't need that, but that's how, if you want to make that interactable and use that as an object, you need to give it a name. Full stop. That's critical. Everything else is somewhat optional. So let's say we've got our form here and we're happy with it. We're ready to roll with it. What we're going to do is go into the lower pane. We're going to do a Control A and a Control C, and we're going to move over to PowerShell. Actually, what I want to do here as well is, because I don't want to, I actually reuse this template fairly often. I'm just going to give myself a scratch one. And what we're going to do, Stephen was kind enough to include his instructions. And this is what makes it so awesome, is that note. Your XAML goes here. It's absolutely true. So watch this witchcraft. We're going to go in here. We're going to copy our text. We're going to go back over to here. We're going to clear that out and paste it in. And doink, we can run that. Now, where's the UI? Well, it technically hasn't been told to load. We haven't really modified this really for production use yet. But the takeaway here is a couple of things. The script, as it's written, if you leave the defaults, you have those names that we supplied. What it does is actually goes ahead and tacks on a WPF. And why would you want to do that? So you know if the variables you're interacting with are a WPF object, or if it's another, or if it's just some other data object. So it's kind of nice to know that you're interacting with your form versus interacting with a data set. The other thing is, this is your command to actually show the UI. And what you can do in the script is you can just have this line there right at the end and it'll auto pop up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that little line of code there and we're just going to go ahead and run this. And then, assuming ISE doesn't crash, I gotta love ISE. Let's try that one more time. Come on, run, and then will it remember that I typed that in? Nope. All right, so there's our UI, just like we had before. So that's really how it all works, is you just paste it in. And you now have something you can interact with. So I'm going to ignore that one. And we're going to go right to the demo, which is more or less the same thing. I made a couple of minor tweaks.
Just before you start that, we've got one question here, actually. It's the definition of WPF. Windows presentation
format.
And that's like a syntax thing, I guess. Like, what's that in definition? Do you know?
I don't know.
I think it's like a method, right, of doing GUIs in PowerShell, at least.
I think so. I don't know what the hard definition of, but it makes it easier. So that's the takeaway. It's much easier writing the code by hand.
Okay.
So what I did here, if we want to look at this code, actually I've got that pulled up in Visual Studio here, is I set a property, and I was monkeying around in here, but this is a property that I had set. I set this is enabled, and I set that to unchecked. And if we look in this part, you really can't interact with it. Well, you shouldn't be able to interact with it, and we see it's grayed out. But what's cool too is we can see that in our XAML. I passed that property. And the reason why I did that is to show how the checkbox actually works. So here we go. Let's go ahead and look at our text output. Sorry to keep jumping around here. So what we can do, we've got a checkbox and a text box and a button. Let's see what this thing does. So I'm going to hit the button. And if you notice, what it's outputting to the console is to enable the checkbox. Okay, I'm going to go follow instructions. What if I don't want to? Well, I can't type into it. Okay, let's turn on the checkbox. Hey, look at that. That's now not grayed out. So now I can type in. Now what happens now it's actually taking the text that I've put in the text box and outputting at the console. So how does the actual code work, and how are we leveraging that to make this functionality work? It's not that bad. So, parsing script stuff. Should let me do, well, you know what? That's fine. I'm going to close that. Oink. Control M is not working. Oh, well. So into this script, everything from above this point is all loading the UI. This is my code here. So let's look at the checkbox functionality and kind of dig into this a bit. So what I've done is I've declared that if I click using this .add click, because remember I actually named this checkbox in Visual Studio, I named it checkbox, and then the parsing script tacked on the WPF, which is how I got the name. And then what I'm doing is I'm using the .add click property to tell the UI that if you click on this object, register this action, and everything that you put in between the parentheses, it's going to do. So you can put in if statements like I did. You can have it call a function. You could have it run another script. You could have it run an executable. You could have it change a color, whatever you want it to do. You click on it, it's going to work. Now, typically, though, what you're doing with a checkbox is you're doing some type of Boolean action. So what this is doing, oops, zoom back in and then click. So what we're saying is if you click on the checkbox, run this if statement. And the if statement says if the checkbox and its property is checked, is true, use the isn't, change the property of text box to true. If the checkbox is, or else, essentially disable the text box. So that's is enabled equals false. That's what we're doing is when we go ahead and click on the checkbox, it then runs this little if statement and then determines if there's if the checkbox is ticked, enable the text box. If it's not ticked, disable the checkbox. And from those type of Boolean function, that and or, you can derive a lot of power from a UI. Do you want to load this option? Check. User has agreed to this EULA. Click the checkbox. Now you got the next button comes up. So you can do a lot with just this little code snippet. It's very, very powerful, and I use it all the time. From the button, it works in more or less the same general idea. You have this add click, which is telling the console again that you've interacted with it and you've clicked on the button. But the button doesn't really have much of a property like it is checked, which is fine. It's just the nature of the button. So what we're going to do is when we actually use that click, it's going to do whatever it, crap. I'm still trying to get the hang of zoom it. It's handy, but it's a little fiddly. But same principle. Everything inside the parentheses is going to run. Typically, what I'll use in Winwich is, I'll have a button, and then I'll have the button call a function, and then it does something, and it returns an action, and cascades. But you could have it do whatever you needed to. In this case, we're just doing write host. So in this case, what the button's doing is our little code snippet here is saying, if the checkbox isn't checked, enable the checkbox. And if it is checked, oops, crap, write the content of the text box. And this .text is where what's written inside the text box actually resides. And I use that one quite frequently in Winwich as well, because I'm asking where mount paths are, file names, image names, image versions, and a lot of that's all stored in various variables .text because it's all displayed to the screen. So that makes it a really easy way to get that data out and then manipulate it. And then how all of that, and that's really all this is doing is just calling a basic write host function. And so there's honestly not much more to it. It's pretty simple. Any questions on the checkboxes, the buttons, the text boxes? I've got some more complicated stuff, but at this point, if there's any questions, please feel free to shoot them at me.
So far, we're good. Nothing just yet. But when they do, I'll definitely pipe up.
Okay. So let me kick back to the slide deck for one more relevant page. Slideshow from current slide. Oh, I'm glad I learned where that button is.
Oh, I've got one that's just come to mind. I was going to ask. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry to disrupt your flow there.
Not a problem.
So when you execute, say, a function, you said in Winwich, how you invoke a button, it does some function, goes away and does something. What do you give the user in that interim period? Like, what can you give the user? What's their experience? Does it look like it's hung in that not responding sort of state, or can you present like a little swirly thing?
Well, I've been lucky for the most part in Winwich. When you're interacting with the UI, it's pretty responsive until you hit the make it so button, and that actually triggers the whole build process. And at that point, the UI more or less just locks up. I know that there's ways of doing parallel processing. I know that there's some community tools out there. There's like my apps that
it locks up because it's invoked DISM presumably, and it's waiting for that return. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, it's all it processes everything in serial. So that's been one of my things that I needed to learn how to make it more usable. So while it's running, you can do other actions. I just haven't gotten there yet.
Gotcha.
But for smaller stuff, it really doesn't make a difference. Like if you're trying to have the form to onboard a new user in 80, do you need to have parallel processing? Probably not. So if you're going to download a 4 gig payload, you may want to just pick that battle.
Sure. Cool.
Anything else? Chat room? I haven't put anybody to sleep yet, have I?
There was one sort of question from Jason Gibson. So you could say use is enabled to have the checkbox disable or enable the button like a user. I think that's a question, but I do. Yeah.
You absolutely could. Sure. You can also use the button to close the form too. I can show you a little script I wrote a client later just to do one from soup to nuts. It was designed to run in Windows PE in a task sequence environment. For those that know what that line of gibberish means. Slideshow. Let me go back to my one from my current slide. Okay. So there's 2 other very useful form objects that I use very, very much and are very helpful and very useful. There's the combo box and the list box. The difference being the combo box, if you're not familiar with that term, it's a drop down. And so you hit the drop down, you get the list of options and you select one. That's a combo box. A list box is a box that has a list of presumably text in there, but each one of those is interactable. So instead of it just being like a text box where it's just straight text where you just read it, list box can actually allow you to interact it and select. The cool thing too is you can do with a list box is you can select individual items or multiple items depending on how you code it. They work exceedingly similar, but there's minor distinctions, mostly because the combo box you can only pick one thing in a drop down, where the list box you can pick multiple objects. And this is going to be that in my slide deck. I don't like slide decks. I prefer live demos, even though they do tend to back to bite you every now and then. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like in Visual Studio. And so here I've made this beautiful, not quite so beautiful UI, but here I've got a button. And the button, we can look at its properties. The button is enabled, as you can see, so it's ready to go. And I've given it the fairly complicated name of button. I've done the same thing as well for the list box. It's called list box. And the combo box is called combo box. Not doing anything with the is enabled because we kind of went through that in the last demo. But if you wanted to turn those on and off, there's your checkbox and it sets that property. It's fun. But anyway, and I've already went in and copied it over and pasted it into PowerShell. And so there's demo 2. So we can see here is list box, combo box, and button. Incidentally, what the parsing script does do, and it's a good question, is you can see when we've created the names within Visual Studio /XAML, you see the syntax x:\name. PowerShell doesn't know what that means. It will cause you to fail. So what this is actually doing is we're taking our code and we are passing that to a variable here, input XML. Actually, and then what goes in from there is then that gets passed down here, and what it's doing is doing a replace to get rid of all of the syntax that will cause the script to puke. And that's really what it's doing. That's one of the part of that magic. It's doing some checking in here too. What I also did to make this work a little more in an automated fashion, let me go ahead and scroll down just a fuzz. Control to that and click. All right. So, and this load objects, I went and tacked on an out null because I don't really want to see all the names of the variables each time. It's handy when you're doing debugging, but don't need it for day to day. And then the other thing is throwing a pound sign or hashtag for you kids in front of the right host, and they get variables. So that just shuts it up. Last thing I did too is I went down to the bottom and actually declared the commentary to cause the UI to load automatically. So when we hit play on this one, this is actually going to load, and we're not going to get a whole bunch of text that we don't care about. Not that we don't care about it, but it's just not relevant. Anyway, so we're going to hit run. And then assuming ISE doesn't crash again. Hey, it didn't. Look at that. So what does this thing do? Well, we can see, and I wish I could interact with this, but I can only draw. But we've got a list box here with string of text 1, 2, 3. I know it's terribly imaginative. But then we've also have a drop down. Green, red, yellow. Cool. What does this do? Well, let's go ahead and select a string of text. And that's how list boxes work. You know, you can select one. I set this up to be single selection. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick a color. I'm going to hit the button and see what it does. String of text in green. That's kind of cool. Let's play with this a little bit more. So what if we take 2 and make yellow? Oh, hey, look at that. We took the different text and gave it a different color. And predictably, we can take a third and change the color, and that works as well. And so right there, from a UI perspective, we've given the user ability to select a subset and then a second subset of data in different forms and be able to take actions. Feasibly, you could do something like, let's say, here's a list of users, and we're going to go ahead and assign them to a department. And then, boink, go. So depending on which makes sense, you can use these. But these are both exceedingly useful objects, is why I'm blathering on about them. So how do we make this magic happen? Fantastic question. The technique in here is a little bit more complicated, but if you've been using PowerShell for a bit, this shouldn't be a stretch. I essentially, and I say I cheated, but I cheated. To feed my data in, I'm going to use an array. You could just as easily have a function like a get items, or what the function is to find every file name in a folder, or whatever you want to do recursively to compile a big list of whatever the data is that you want to work with and throw it at a variable name. That's all you need to do. This is just easy and gives a good visual of what I'm doing. So here we go with this combo box. Go ahead. Adam, were you going to?
Oh, did you hear that? I only enabled my mic. Yeah, I was going to jump in at some point and ask a question. It was,
yeah, I saw your mic arm going up, so I assumed you were.
Well, if it's all right, I may as well ask it now. It's from Chris Kibble. He Donna, when you come back to make updates to your forms, are you copying the XAML out from your PS1 into Visual Studio, or are you saving your Visual Studio projects and coming back to edit forms? He says it's an octothorpe.
I'll copy it out of Visual Studio and into PowerShell. I typically go one way because I want to keep Visual Studio as a source of truth in case I lose my scripting. Sometimes I will go backwards. Like if I'm in Wimwich and I'm developing something, like, oh crap, I forgot to enable that checkbox. I can go and hit that really quick. Actually, where I do that all the time is in the version number, because I always forget to change that in Visual Studio. So it'll be like, your version 1.9, I'm on 2.2. And so I'll sometimes do that for minor, but usually it's unidirectional out of Visual Studio and into PowerShell.
Cool. I'll keep quiet when I unmute my mic.
Okay. Was there any? Oh, that's okay. Was that the only question?
So far, yeah. I'll
Okay.
I'll pipe up when there's another one. Yep.
Awesome. So anyway, using arrays to fill variables is what we're going to do here. We can see there's red, green, yellow that feeds my combo box, and then I've got string of text 1, 2, 3, which I'm going to use to populate the list box. So how do we do that? Easily, really, using for each. I love for each. Boy, was I happy when I figured out how that one worked. So what we're doing is we're taking, just a for each, so every variable within combo box array. And here's where the syntax comes into play here. Oops, crap. I just keep hitting escape, and I don't mean to. I mean to hit E. So the syntax is here is our object, our combo box, the WPF prefix. And I'm using the functionality items.add. And what that's going to do is it's going to add whatever you stick inside this parenthesis as a discrete object within the combo box. So what this is doing is it's taking the combo box array, and it's going green, add green, and then for the next, add red and add yellow. And that's how it goes ahead and populates each option within the combo box. And realistically, it works the same way with the list box. It's using the same syntax, item.add. And that goes ahead and populates the list box. So, hopefully that kind of gives you a good idea how you can get that data in and how to start making it usable. As a side note, when you start messing with this, if you don't put an out null in there, which is you don't have to, what it will do is it will output a number for each index that it's populating. Combo boxes and list boxes, outside of having just the name of whatever you're sticking in there, they actually have an index number. So you don't have to remember that the first field is red, it can be index 1. And that gets useful if you want to set a default. Like if we look, when we loaded this form, you notice how this combo box had nothing in there? It's because you really want to set a step when you're in here to set the selected item to be index 1. I don't want to go down that code because it's introducing complexity, but that's a well-documented thing. It's easy to figure out. If you can't, ping me, or go into Wimwich, because everything I'm doing in here is in there. That's actually how my coding works. Is how the hell did I do that? Function, scroll. Oh, there's the function. Copy, paste, change names.
I'm forever looking back at code I've written before, because I always think I've done that before. We've got one more question here from Jason. Will the combo box dynamically add a scroll bar if you have more items that fit in the designated list box size?
I don't know. I've never done it.
Does that make sense? I think the question is, does it dynamically add a scroll bar? I think that's more or less.
I don't know. My combo boxes have only been like three options, so I've never reached that limit. It's well within the possibility that it may not. However, I know from text boxes, it doesn't. That was one thing I had to figure out. So you can do a scroll bar if we can see that. There is a scroll bar option, which I did use in Wimwich for putting in really long paths, so you can scroll back and forth. So short answer is I don't know. But if it doesn't, you have a scroll bar function that you can tack into your XAML if that's required.
Well, in that combo box you had a moment ago, where's the code that gives you the selection so you can maybe just, I don't know, add a few more options and see what happens, maybe?
Oh, well, let's go ahead and...
That's completely throwing you off. I know it is. I'm sorry, but it's just a curiosity,
Well, let's do this. I know how we can cheat the system.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and we're going to throw a comma. I'm going to go. All right, now let's see what it does. There's your answer. It looks like it does.
Nice.
Cool. I'm going to leave that there now. That's awesome. So thanks for pointing that one out. Actually, the thought never occurred to me. So it's cool that that functionality exists. That actually makes me happy.
That's a good question, Jason. Thank you.
So let's see what we're doing here. So where did we leave off? Populating. So we did that.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
it kind
Yeah,
of
we did
ended
that.
on talking about adding to the array and it piping out the
Okay.
index. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, that's where we use the out null to shut that up, because you'll get numbers showing up. Yeah, but that's what that is. If you see that, if you take the out null off. So how do you actually use this? These combo boxes. Well, how do you use those selected items? Well, it's actually pretty simple. List boxes and combo boxes have a property called selected item. And that means exactly what it sounds like. It's your selected item. So in the combo box, in our example, if we select red, red is a selected item. Combo box, or I'm sorry, the list box would be your string of text. Combo box would be your color. But that's all we're doing, is we're just taking, our object and this particular property selected item, and it'll pass it. It'll pipe it through as a variable. Easy peasy. List boxes, you can do selected items, so you can do multiples. It just depends on if you're supporting singular or plural, which kind of comes down to your use case. And really, just looking at this code, we've all used write host, and I'm using it because of the foreground color option makes it simple to understand. So really, what we're doing here is calling write host, and we're using the selected text from our list box, our selected item, and then using the selected item, which is color, and passing it the foreground color function. So you can see here that if we, with the button, we could actually have it call function pass username pass department, and then it can go update like Active Directory, or it could go do something, or it could go, I don't know, make you a sandwich, whatever your script does. But with those objects selected, you now have that data that you can pass to your algorithms, your functions, whatever you have you to make your scripts work. And so I guess that's kind of the extent of what I put together. I do have another script that I wrote for a client that doesn't fully work in here because he uses the task sequence environment. I mean, I could show you that.
Well, yeah. I mean, Jason actually came back with another follow-up question to that. I don't think he actually meant the combo box. I think he said the combo box, but he came back and clarified. I think he actually meant the list box. The one with the multi-select. I think he was curious on if we added more items into that multi-select list, does that produce a scroll bar? I think that was what he meant. I think.
I know how we can find that out.
Yeah, maybe we could do a similar sort of throw more stuff into the array or something.
Yeah, we can do this instead. I'll go to. Oh, I'm not running this as administrator. Derp. Okay, let me close that. That would cause it. Yeah, Winwich is one of those solutions that you really need to run it as an admin. PowerShell ISE. Yes. All right. So for those who haven't seen it, this is my pet project. This is my baby. She does quite a bit here. But boom, there's my UI. So you can see there's checkboxes, text boxes, scroll bar, buttons. What I wanted to look at though to test this theory. I gotta select a source Vim. Let's see, what do I have here? I think I imported a bunch for 1909. Outgrid, love this thing. It's a lazy way to make a UI, and that's not a bad thing. I don't mind something as long as it works. All right, so now we should be able to go ahead and select. Yep.
Oh, excellent.
Automatic. Yep. Totally works. Good to know. I thought that was the case, but we can go ahead and just load it just for validation.
No, that's hopefully that helps. And there's a couple more questions filling in now. Actually, Jason with another follow-up one.
Okay.
He is curious to know if it's possible to make an item in your default or pre-selected, or a pre-selected item in the list box. I think by the wording of that, can you pre-select an item in that list as a sort of highlighted already, and the user doesn't need, can just hit OK, and that item is already selected. Is that possible that you know of?
I would imagine so, because you could call either the item or the index. I'm not sure. I've never tried. I know you can do it with combo boxes, because I actually do that with. I do that. I know you can do it with combo boxes for sure, but I've not. The idea hadn't occurred to me to try it with a list box. I would imagine so. You'd either needed to do some type of thing where, step through the list box, and then say, for each in list box, if name is like, then do, or if you want it to be item number 1, you could do index. So it's possible. I just don't know.
Okay.
Where I've used it with a combo box is here. I default at either disabled, and then I have a check going to see if it's config manager or going to be OSD sus, and then update the index depending on what the return is. But yeah, doing that with a combo box is very easy. I've just never tried it with a list.
The presumably I'm pretty sure I've seen it, but Winwich is on GitHub, so if people wanted to mooch around on
yeah,
source code to see what's what, or at least they'll have a copy of it when they download it at the very least.
Yeah, I have a GitHub. I don't use it, and I haven't updated it in like 6 months. So if you really want to use Winwich as a pick it apart kind of thing, and laugh at my code, because I know everyone here is probably much better at PowerShell than I am. If you go to I actually bought the domain name, so I could just go to winwich.com. But for the time being, we can go to MS Endpoint. You can also Google Winwich; it'll take you here. Tools. There's Winwich. I'm starting to work on all the installation or all of the instructions. We go to installation. Where is the? There it is. Save script.
Gotcha.
Zoom in. So yeah, you can just do a save script and download the script and then pick it apart. It's all self-contained. People have asked me for years, why don't you just make a module? Because I want to keep it all in one script.
The train of thought behind the question was just that if these guys wanted to see examples of how to do what you've done, then they knew where to go for the source code. That was
absolutely. Yep. Yeah, everything is in there. Everything that you've seen today has been in use. I've been using tabs. I've got various pop-ups for .NET for doing selecting files, selecting folders. There's a bunch of other good stuff in there. Loading modules, checking, calling the PowerShell gallery. That's all in there. If you please feel free to pick apart my my code, and if you see any improvements, I'm not shy. You can tell me it sucks and what needs to be fixed.
Awesome. So we've got another question here from Bash Amanus,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Say you need to populate a text box with the output of whatever function your button click performs.
Okay.
Would you need to redraw the form? I've never been able to make this work.
Nope. So you would do something along the lines of, let me go ahead and do. What I know I had. Because I got it in. Give me 1 sec to load this back up. Script. And all right. So what are we doing in this one again? That is just to refresh my memory. So what you can do something along the lines of this. So let's see here. So we're going to have, where's our dialog box? Okay. So you could do something kind of along the lines of this. We're going to do WPF text box dot text equals. Oh, actually, no, we could string this in. This is a better idea. So where's our button? Let's do this. I'm just going to rem out the existing button code, and then what I can do is WPF text box dot text equals. Now, presumably, what you would want to do is, text box dot text equals function, right. And then your function needs to return whatever data set it's going to be. But if we Let's close that, and we'll go ahead and rerun this again to stick it into memory, and then we go ahead and do that, and we go here. See?
Gotcha.
Changed it. The trick is just using that .text, because that's the property that's changing, and not the whole object.
What do you think the person meant by would you need to redraw the form? I don't quite understand what that bit means.
If you would need to, if it was like a property change that doesn't update or on the fly, so you would need to close it and then reopen it. I think that might be more of like a legacy, PowerShell forms, where you would actually have to, when you draw it out, you're actually declaring all this code. But yeah, you don't have to. With WPF, you can just tell the text property of the text box what to equal, and whatever you want to throw at it, just throw at it, and it'll take it.
That makes sense. Excellent. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like there's one more question that's been
Awesome.
somewhat answered already in the chat by someone called Let's Experience Music, but I definitely think it's a question worth asking you because maybe you've done it. But the question is basically, have you packaged your PS1 script that generated a GUI into an exe? Have you compiled it into an exe and distributed it to folks on the help desk? Have you done that before?
No, I haven't. I know like Morris Daly over at MSM Point has done that with driver automation tool.
Compiled
I haven't really
created an exe out of a script sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah. Then you have to get code signing certs, and there's some other, and then that sometimes gets flagged by antivirus. I don't know. Like with Wimwich, I probably should, but then I need to find some mechanism to go ahead and deploy or to store and have people download the exe, and I just haven't gotten around to it. It's on the to-do, but no, I haven't done it.
Well, there was a pretty decent reply from Let's Experience Music. It says you can create a back file that calls the PS1. I'm personally not a fan of that, but if it's something that you're going to share with help desk staff, that might be completely alien to them. I'm sure double-clicking a back file is something they can do, and also working around that code signing, because that is a genuine pop-up and a warning that users get otherwise, because you're right, if you do compile into a certificate, you do get that warning. Nigel suggested PS2XE. I have used that before, and it worked quite well. Yeah, so PS2XE is... Sorry.
No, that's what I would use if I ever went down that. I know that it exists, and I've heard good things about it. I just haven't got around to it.
Awesome. That's pretty much the question so far. So you said you've got this script that you wrote for a client that's for a task sequence environment. So maybe not everyone's familiar with Config Manager here is listening. Maybe just what's the task sequence?
So what a task sequence is, it's a sequence of tasks that is defined and used to image computers, essentially. So but the cool thing is each task you can put conditions. So you can say, if the computer's like this, do this step. If the computer's like that, do this step. And they can get extremely granular and extremely complicated. And they're absolutely beautiful if you're starting it off. They're terrifying as hell. But once you start getting the hang of them, boy, are they exceedingly useful. So anyway, what the purpose of this script was, I had a client, they wanted to have, when they kick off the task sequence, so they do the F2 to boot into Pixie. And what they wanted to do, because they have users all over the world, and what they wanted to do was have the ability to have a UI pop up to allow the technician to select what the language, what the language and region was going to default to. So my solution was, hey, I already wrote Wimwich. So Wimwich handles language packs, local experience packs, the FODs, all that good stuff. So let's just cram it all in there. So everything Windows would need is there. And then the trick is just telling Config Manager how to make it work. Haha, PowerShell. So when I go ahead and execute this, we're going to get an error because the COM object that calls the Config Manager task sequence environment isn't loaded. So just ignore the error. And see, and there it is. But here, this is where I compiled all of this information, or used except the checkbox. So if we look at this guy, we've got a list box here, and I pre-populated it with our languages and regions. And the reason why I have this in multiple steps is because I wanted to prevent a fat fingering from the technician. Because once the task sequence goes, you really don't want to mess with it, and you can't just go. There's no backspace or undo. Once it goes, it goes. So what I did here is I said, okay, we're going to select Japanese, and then it's going to go ahead and populate it into the text box. And then that's like that confirmation that I can hit OK. Now, some of the code takeaway here is when I hit OK, we notice the form closed by itself automatically. So what I did in that case is that code segment exists here. So like here's the command to display the UI tacked at the very end. This is the command to shut it. And you can see it's all a $sign form. That's the name of the variable that the entire form lives in. And you're just telling the form what to do. That way you can tell it to open and close. I also stuck an exit code 0 in there so the task sequence engine knew that because it's looking for that. So that just makes it happy. I guess without going into the gory details of it, we can look. Oops. Let me do that one again. Where else? So you can see here, just like I was doing before, I went and set an array with all the languages. And I went ahead and populated my list box with all the languages, just like I did in the other one. There's the out null to keep it from squawking. But in this case, though, with the button, we have the add click. What I'm doing to actually find to get which variable has been selected, I'm setting this variable here, and I'm calling a function, set language, and I've got that up here, and it's just some basic stuff. The selected lang is what is going to end up getting returned back out of the function. So I set a default just in case they hit X and it somehow muddles through. At least it doesn't just throw up all over itself. But really all it's doing is you can see it's doing a comparative of looking at the text box. There's your selected lang was the name of that text box where it goes and writes it to, and .text. I'm just doing a comparative and setting the variable name or setting this populating this variable based off of whatever exists in the text box. Nothing crazy. It's kind of just an extension of what I've been blathering about over the last hour. So it does the comparative, sets the value based off of whatever is in that text box, returns selected lang, then that comes down and that gets kicked over to variable. And lastly, this is actually a variable within the task sequence. It's outside of PowerShell, but this whole process allows you to take data out of PowerShell and pass it into native task sequence objects so you can then take actions. Because the task sequence variables allow you to set conditions. So you can say, in this case, custom underscore lang is now either going to be en, us, ESES, ESMX, or JAJP. And then in the task sequence, I can say, if custom lang is ESMX, do this step. If it's ENUS, do this step. And then I've got all the keyboard and the language and all that time zone, all that stuff set there. And so it's kind of an extension of all that stuff that I just kind of went through today and actually, building hours against it. So, I mean, it's building a basic UI. Once you get the general gist of it, you can become really popular for people because, I need something to take data in here. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, that's going to be 8 hours of billable work. And I'm just sitting here in PowerShell and I got Star Trek going and a cup of coffee and the printer's going. And you come back and like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted. And it's like, it wasn't that difficult. It's a good skill set to have. It really is.
That was tremendous. That was really insightful. I think that was a great introduction. I've never really given GUIs the time of day, and I don't know why. I can't see why I wouldn't. That was a very nice icebreaker. That.
Excellent. And just remember, just as the follow up, if you do nothing else, go here if you want to learn. That is the absolute resource. Steven's the man. He's done his song and dance at MMS and all sorts of other Microsoft stuff. So for further, you really want to take it up, do that. You can also ping me. I'm on Twitter. Did I put that in the slide deck? I may have at Notorious DRR.
Yeah,
If
your
not,
Twitter handle is on the title of the video, I think. If not, it's definitely in the description. So if you guys have any
okay,
questions that you want to follow up with, I'm sure you can
ping me.
definitely. Yeah.
Please do. So,
And I suppose you've ever heard of like I've heard this before. Metro GUI building, like that's a thing, right? With PowerShell GUI building Metro stuff.
yeah, because and I forget the names of the folks involved because I have no short-term memory. Lost most of my long-term memory too. It's all filled with config manager and useless Star Trek trivia. But yeah, there's a process. There's a whole project called My Apps. It's MAH
That's
apps. And then what they're doing, and I've looked at it because actually, and I feel bad because I want to say his first name is Jerome, but I could be completely wrong. But he pinged me. He's like, "Hey, I took Wimwich and I applied this to it." I'm like, "Damn, that's sexy!" Yeah, because like he had all the tabs were loaded down the left side, and there's all these smooth transitions. The only problem with it, though, the reason why I didn't adopt it is because there's a DLL that drives all this graphic stuff. And since I'm pulling this down as a single PS1 file out of PowerShell gallery, that's not compatible unless I wanted to have an external dependency to say, go detect a DLL. If DLL is not, then go download and load. If DLL does not load, then fall back and use it.
okay.
It's just not worth it.
So what's the dependency with WPF then? Is it .NET based?
Like,
I think I heard someone
yeah,
say that earlier in the
it
chat.
is .NET based.
Right. And is there like a minimum version that you know of that needs to exist for it to function as a bare minimum?
I think 3. It could go earlier.
Oh, okay.
I'm using,
Been
I'm
around
using
for a while
5.
then.
Yeah, I'm using it. This will run in PowerShell 3. Like Wimwich runs in PowerShell 3, except for parts of it that don't, like PS script root that exists in PowerShell 5.
Right.
So I have to set a minimum level to 5. So PS script roots because I have no idea where people install Wimwich. Half the time it's in downloads, which is a bad idea, because you'll end up having 25 gigs worth of OS media and updates and binaries just hanging out in your user profile. But that's what my apps. It's cool if you're not going to be doing something where I need to stick to one file. Absolutely check it out. It is so cool. It puts so much polish onto a project. It is really sexy. It's very sexy.
No, that was really good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your
You're
time
welcome.
for you coming on to do that for us. That was
Yes.
really, really engaging, really, really good. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. I know I definitely did. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Before I wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to mention, Donna?
I don't think so. Please, if you got questions, comments, whatever, follow up. Ping me on Twitter if you want. If you don't want to make it public, I do have my direct messages open, which can be dangerous, but no one's taken advantage of that yet. So we'll leave it that way until the ugly side of Twitter figures that out. But yeah, please, if you got questions. And I guess the last takeaway is, again, if you're on the fence or you're scared to start, this isn't that difficult. You can do it. You can absolutely do it.
Excellent. Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Donna.
Welcome.
The recordings, like I say, will be available for tomorrow. PowerShell Southampton does want to make a call for speakers. So if anybody has a topic in mind that they wish to present, anything at all, please get in touch with me. And we can arrange something. I just want to say thanks to Chris Kibble for help behind the scenes getting this set up for me. And subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. That way you can find out when we go live. And like I say, you can catch the recording for tomorrow and look back at our other sessions as well. And the next session, if I just change scene, you will be able to see that the next session is tomorrow night, same time, with Josh Duffney, and he is doing using Ansible with Azure Live. So if you don't know what Ansible is, you want to break in and you want to break in with it using or on Azure, come along. It'll be really good, really, really good. So yeah, thanks everyone, and take care, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.